Hey, everybody, welcome into the 15-minute drill. I'm your host, Jimmie Allen, and today we're going to have a conversation about something I don't know if everybody's ready to have a conversation about, and it's the long lasting effects of Curt Cignetti at Indiana. Now, obviously, the Hoosiers just celebrating the first national championship in school history. How can this have a long term effect? And across the country, I don't know if it will. It may have an effect as far as coaches or programs trying to get a jump start or turn their program around in 2 years. But I think we got to talk about the significance of the turnaround that Curt Cignetti pulled off in Bloomington. Not only did he turn around a bad Big Ten program in Indiana, he turned around the worst winning percentage wise program in Power Four history. He took the bottom of the bottom and rose the cream all the way up to the top. And this is getting compared a lot to Nick Saban in a sense of how down Alabama was when Saban took over in '07. Obviously, they lose to Louisiana Monroe in that first year. But I think this is even more significant. I'm not even debate that. It's clearly more significant than that because of the history. There isn't a Bear Bryant in Indiana. They didn't have the success that Alabama had. They didn't even have close to the success that Alabama had previous to showing up to Nick Saban showing up in Tuscaloosa. They didn't have the resources available in Bloomington either. Now, there's obviously the Mark Cuban of it all and the donors of the basketball program. They've obviously had some rich tradition in other sports, men's basketball included, but it was never translated across to football with anybody before. And I know this is all common knowledge, and Curt Cignetti's significance and success is clearly marked. But what I think other people need to be worried about as far as the Nick Saban effect is the keeping up with the Joneses that we're already seeing across college football and college sports in general. I don't think clearly Curt Cignetti didn't get anybody fired this year. At the end of the 26-27 season, we're going to see head coaches across the Big Ten probably looking for different jobs, and there'd be a mad dashes in an arms race to try to keep up with Indiana. Not even if Curt Cignetti doesn't duplicate the success from this year. I mean, this is a monumental year. Not only do you win a national championship, you produce the Heisman Trophy winner, but if you don't have an Indiana level success turnaround at a program like Nebraska, like Iowa, like Penn State, I mean, you can argue that James Franklin arguably got fired because of Curt Cignetti this year. We're going to start seeing a lot of what happened in the SEC between 2007 and the latter years of Nick Saban is coaches getting fired on shorter leashes because of the success happening in Bloomington. Now, this has already kind of happened for stretches across the Big Ten with the Ohio States of the world because I think a lot of people said, well, we got to keep up with Ohio State. But there was programs at the latter end, the Michigan States, the Rutgers of the world that were never going to be in the same arms race with the Buckeyes. That's different now because everybody's able to pay players. You know, obviously not everybody has the same amount of resources, but it kind of felt like Indiana was behind everybody that was a part of the groups that are haves not and not have nots. Indiana clearly a have not for a very long time, not just in the Big Ten, but from a national standpoint as well. So you're going to have these lower level programs that are going to point at Curt Cignetti and look at the success that Indiana has had and say, why can't we be them? Or they're going to look at their head coach specifically and say, why couldn't you do that? Now, I think Curt Cignetti, along with a few other handful of other coaches, Deion Sanders at Colorado, have already sparked this trend of going out and hiring a head coach that could bring transfer players with them to their next stop. Cignetti clearly bringing his JMU transfers that he was able to bring with him from James Madison, along with players like Curtis Work from Ohio, or be able to sell himself and his program and get a boost in NIL from a guy like Mark Cuban to be able to attract some players as well. That helped a ton. And this is very much a copycat sport. I think that has become the trend. So if you're a fan of a college football program and your coach is on the hot seat, don't be surprised if the next head coach hired, the first question they're answering is about players that they can bring with them from their previous stops. Now, you can make the argument that this year in Boulder, the reason it wasn't as successful is because you didn't have the Shedeur Sanders and the Travis Hunters of the world that came with Deion to Boulder, and obviously Coach Prime's health issues haven't helped. But that is something that is, if there's a coach at the group of five level that gets brought into a Power Five school, the conversation is going to be about the amount of players that they can bring with them. And there's a lot of discussion about legislation coming in that's going to be able to fix that. And that might be the one selling point not to is it's beneficial for everybody if you have success and you're able to go to the next level or go to a quote higher level program that now with the changes of the college football landscape of the college football playoff have automatic bids for their conference champions. If you haven't heard the news, the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12, all of their conference champions now get an auto bid into the college football playoff, and then Notre Dame if they're in the top 12 in the country. So if you can find a group of 5 coach that has their poop in a group and they can bring a bunch of guys with them, it's going to help jumpstart or maybe even advance your program further because you don't have that learning curve. You have a group of guys that already know the head coach's system that could be coaches on the field and help train the guys that are already on campus from the previous regime and get them up to speed a little bit faster as well. But as far as Curt Cignetti in Indiana, if they're able to even come close to replicating, if they could duplicate what they did 2 years or last year, technically 2 years ago, technically, and just get to the college football playoff, that might be enough to fire some head coaches in the Big Ten this year if they don't even come close to sniffing the upper half of the Big Ten. Because obviously you saw this year 4 teams from the Big Ten getting into the college football playoff, and that sets expectations. And there's clearly a pecking order in the Big Ten. I think you can. It's obvious that Indiana is at the top of that, and then a very small step after that is the Oregons and Ohio States. And then after that, listen, Michigan just fired their head coach. Penn State just fired their head coach. And 2 years ago, those 2 programs were thought to be at the top of the Big Ten. There's already changes there, so you're not going to see a ton of change from those 2 programs this season unless things get catastrophically bad with the head coaches they hired. I don't expect that to be the case. With Matt Campbell going to Penn State and then Kyle Whittingham being hired from Utah to Michigan, which I think was a home run hire. But it'll be interesting to see the trickle-down effect of that because it's not like when Nick Saban was at Alabama, only Florida and Georgia were firing their head coaches. We saw it trickle down all the way to the Mississippi States of the world on up, and I think that's going to be the case this year. I mean, a guy like Greg Schiano, who's got a ton of success when you look at it on a scale of Rutgers expectations, it'll be interesting to see if they're not a perennial top half of the Big Ten team this year, how the people in Piscataway, New Jersey view that, because I think 4 years ago, you would have looked at Piscataway, New Jersey and Bloomington, Indiana and said, they look like they're on the same playing field. You brought Greg Schiano back, who had top 10 level success in 2007 and was able to, get Rutgers back on the map of college football. It hasn't been duplicated to that level since Greg Schiano came back. Now, obviously, here in Nebraska, where I'm from, there's a lot of pressure on Matt Rule to win this season. Maybe not a tremendous amount. He may get a little bit of a pass with Dylan Raiola choosing to transfer to Oregon, but Trey Taylor, the 2027 quarterback who's set to come in with next year's high school recruiting class, currently bringing in a top 5 recruiting class in the country with him, may buy Matt Rule a little bit more time because the schedule is very daunting. They play 4 of the college football playoff teams from this year next season, and you're breaking in a new quarterback which seems to be Anthony Calandria. We'll see if he ends up getting the starting nod over existing quarterback TJ Lateef. But if you look at what Curt Cignetti's effect is going to be across the Big Ten, it's going to be pretty daunting to the rest of these coaches. I mean, specifically their biggest rival in Purdue definitely doesn't have the resources that Indiana has now, and doesn't seem like they're getting those anytime soon. They've had a ton of unsuccessful seasons, specifically recently, really since Jeff Brom left for Louisville. So that may cause even a little more turnover than they're used to in West Lafayette. Now, when you look at guys like Kirk Ferentz and Brett Bielema, the guys that have been staples in the Big Ten, obviously Bielema not as long at Illinois, but through his times and his stops in Wisconsin and now the success that he's had in Champaign, they were projected to be a college football playoff contender for this season with all the experience that they had coming back. They obviously fell short of that. And then Indiana goes on to win the national championship. So that adds a little bit more pressure to Brett Bielema. I think Brett Bielema is a hell of a coach. I think he's done a fantastic job in Illinois. I think he got the short stick down at Fayetteville for a lot of reasons. I would like to see him get a little more leash there. I know a lot of people that are Arkansas fans wouldn't agree with that, but he's clearly very successful in Wisconsin and is a very successful Big Ten coach. But is that enough anymore? Is being a respectable coach or maybe overachieving for your program standards good enough when a guy that took the bottom feeder of the bottom feeders in Indiana was able to win a national championship in just 2 seasons? And it feels like Indiana's going to be a perennial college football playoff team a year or next year, even after losing Fernando Mendoza this season. And does Curt Cignetti become a victim of his own success too? I mean, if Indiana doesn't make the college football playoff this year, how do we view Curt Cignetti? And listen, I mean, he told you, just Google him. He's been able to have success everywhere he's been, whether it be Elon, whether all the James Madison, all the way up to Indiana. He's won everywhere he's been. So I wouldn't expect anything less to a top 4, top 3 finish from the Hoosiers this season. As long as the guy that's in the power chair is still Curt Cignetti, he knows how to coach football. I don't know why more teams aren't just zone running and throwing back shoulder passes, which seems to be all the Hoosiers did this season. It won them a national championship, specifically offensively. That defense was a whole nother monster, but it seems to be a pretty copy and paste recipe for what's worked in Bloomington. But the other thing about this whole discussion is the arms race, right? I mean, it's been about NIL and how we have the highest paid roster we can get. It's clearly worked in Lubbock, but it was only good enough to get them into the college football playoff and contend, not to contend for national championship. They got blanked by Oregon, which Indiana just smacked in the mouth. But the drive around college football is having the best money and the most money in the best facilities and getting the most and having the most to be able to provide the most for high profile players. Indiana had 7 4-star players on their entire roster, 0 5-stars, everybody else a 3-star or fewer. So it's not like they were going out and getting these former 5-star flunkies from these programs that just didn't work out somewhere else and bringing them in and plug and playing. No, they went out and got a bunch of football players that were all rowing in the same direction to become a successful unit, and they bought into what Curt Cignetti was selling. And I think it's really interesting because Curt Cignetti gets a lot of flack, and he kind of talked about this a little bit with his opening, not press conference, but the halftime speech that he gave about Purdue sucking and hating Ohio State and all that, that he felt like he needed to inject some energy into Indiana's program. You've never really seen that from his players. I mean, Fernando Mendoza is about the most opposite of cocky that you'll ever see in a quarterback. And yeah, there was a little bit of attitude from his defense, but there was never that guy that got over his skis or had a stupid penalty because of his attitude. And it just felt like every single player was an extension of their head coach from a sense of dialed in and buying into the program, not the attitude he reflected, which I think is a really unique situation. We talked about the head coach currently in Nebraska, and Matt Rule. I mean, I think back to the years of Bo Pelini, where you had some really good defenses, some really successful teams, but there was always somebody on the field in crunch situations that would let the best of their personality come out and get a penalty or cause some sort of game altering decision based on what they did on the field outside of the field of play, whether it be an unsportsmanlike conduct or a boneheaded penalty, sometimes even the head coach. And that's why Bo Pelini's tenure in Lincoln ran out quicker than I think a lot of people around here would have ultimately liked to see it happen. But that didn't happen under Curt Cignetti, and specifically not in the big time championship or top 5 matchup style games we saw the Hoosiers in quite often this year. And if you're a coach in the Big Ten, you better get used to that, because the talent and the coaching around the Big Ten is just going up and up and up. And when we talk about the arms race of keeping up with the Joneses, I think programs should be paying attention to who's in the power chair from a head coaching standpoint of the football programs, more than how much they can pay their athletes on the field, because that seems to be what's going to pay dividends more than how much you can pay a 5-star quarterback to come in and make a difference in your program. But with that being said, you get the right head coach, you get the 5-star quarterback. Those things seem to mesh hand in hand. But I really think the Curt Cignetti is going to have the Nick Saban effect this year, specifically in the Big Ten. You can argue it already happened with what the changes that were made in Happy Valley this season and probably in Ann Arbor with getting head coaches fired, because I think that's the tip of the iceberg this season. And the trickle down effect is going to see its way in the 26-27 year with the lower level programs, probably maybe making some changes faster than normally would a head coach because of the success they've seen in Bloomington, Indiana. This has been the 15-minute drill with Jimmie Allen. If you haven't liked and subscribed on YouTube, please do. It means a lot. Please leave a comment. Give us your thoughts. Is Curt Cignetti the next Nick Saban? Is he already Nick Saban? We'll debate that and talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. This has been the 15-minute drill with Jimmie Allen.